Now we have the illustrations for Chapter 16 of Among the Multihulls, 14 minutes. And this is the story of our boat building training project in the Philippines. And the Philippines, it must be the trimaran capital of the world. This one is typical of the many thousands of double outrigger paddling canoes used for fishing in the Philippines, a nation of 8,000 islands. Here's a larger one, this one equipped with inboard engine, 18 horsepower Briggs & Stratton air-cooled engines. After World War II, the GIs took engines out of pumps and put them into these boats, thus they call them pump boats. Their traditional name is bangka, which descends from the earliest Austronesian word for boat, wangka. And here's a larger one yet, this one with twin pump engines. And this entire family, like many thousands of other families, is entirely dependent on the fishing and transport revenues from these bangkas. Now the bottoms of the main hulls of these trimarans are made out of a single piece of wood, the so-called casco or shoe. The hull is built up from these bottoms, and the bottoms come from a single log. It's a solid dugout, one piece. It's a very noble, rot-resistant species of Philippine mahogany, and the trees are no longer available for this traditional marine architecture. That's why I was there. Right, it was the same problem as in Africa. And it wasn't just for little boats. This is a much larger bangka used for carrying freight inter-island. It's lying aground at low tide. This one is propelled entirely by sail, and the economy of many of the outer islands is dependent on these vessels. This one happens to be loaded up with soda pop and firewood, and these guys often spend their lives on these boats, no home ashore. And notice the great big one in the background. They call the big ones lumba lumba. And again, the bottom of the main hull of these big trimarans is built with a single log dugout casco. And of course the species are rare and only cut illegally. And of course the sailing hardware is extremely crude but economically very efficient. And whether sailed or motored, the hulls themselves are extremely efficient because of their very narrow hull form. But, of course, they are unstable unless outrigger stabilized, which is why they are trimarans. It just doesn't take much power to push a narrow hull through the water. Which is why I think these boats are futuristic. Here are a couple of the big so-called basnigans, about 150 feet long. Incidentally, when I was there in the 1980s, the official World Bank estimate of the number of these bangka trimarans, large and small, in the Philippines, the official estimate was 700,000. And it was getting so they couldn't build them anymore. Well, no, they could build them by using luan, their local tropical pine, which is an inferior species for boat building, and without epoxy, which is far too expensive, their boats required reconstruction even during the first year of service. And all of that is to explain how I came to be in the Philippines. I guess word of my project in Africa began to get around, so this man in the middle, Mr. Toy Cancio, is a prominent furniture manufacturer in the Philippines, and he figured he could do something about this boat problem if he had a technology transfer. The guy on the left is Lucas, his shop foreman, and on the right the tall American is Michael Allen, who has many years of experience in the Philippines. Cancio came to America and learned about constant camber from the Guzon brothers, And this shows it in its most elemental form, a small mold with lots of curvature and a vacuum bag pressing the layers of veneer down to form a panel. Note the small vacuum pump in the foreground. This is John Marple's early experiments in making constant camber monohulls. With these two panels of compound curved plywood made on the same mold and cut to their prescribed profiles, they are then stitched together down the center line, the keel line, to become the hull. And then the two panels are folded up so as to begin to join them at the stem, which is in the foreground, and to spread them at the stern in the background to receive the transom. This is a process we call torturing. And this torturing creates some standing stresses within the hull panels themselves, which actually increase rigidity. And that means that the finished boat can remain absolutely frameless. There is no skeleton to support the inside of this vessel. And that makes it so much easier to build. And when we showed this process to Cancio, he said, "Okay, let's go to the Philippines and go to work." And incidentally, this is the John Marple's designed gull dinghy, a tremendously stiff and lightweight little boat. And here we have the local equivalent of the banca, the hull going together on the right, the hull completed in the middle, and on the left is the panel operation. We were working in a furniture factory at Cebu, Philippines, and we had trained furniture makers to help us with this operation. This was not an amateur undertaking. So the work went very fast and nobody got hurt. And I was extremely pleased with the hull forms. It was clear from the start that constant camber could produce a very slippery hull form. So this is that hull as outfitted with the traditional outriggers and sail plan. And I'll say that this boat was fast. You can see by her wake. She's the first one that we had the chance to demonstrate to the Philippine government. They were in the process of negotiating for a large loan from the World Bank to update their fisheries. The government looked at this boat and said, "Too nice for a workboat." So we went back to the factory and began to develop a more commercially viable, more serviceable craft. It turned out to be this 32-foot catamaran for better load carrying. And notice that the streamlining across the leading edge of the wing is also made from a constant camber panel. Lucas just loved this boat because he said it could go farther and stay longer and therefore save his village on the outer islands that he came from. Well, the story of what happened to that Philippine project is better explained in the text. But let's go on with a bit more now about constant camber, what resulted elsewhere from this project. Back in the United States, we began to develop yachts and commercial excursion vessels using constant camber. And this 44-footer has the same streamlined constant camber wing panel as in the workboat in the Philippines. And again, because these panels require no internal skeleton to support them, building them was a lot cheaper and easier than with traditional construction. And if we really wanted to make it too nice for a workboat, we could alternate species in the laminate and even book match the veneers for the interior surfaces of these panels. Very beautiful woodwork. And now we had the chance to get big. This is a 65-foot mold, and it is being planked by these guys using full 4-by-8-foot panels of plywood. The construction goes very fast. These men can staple down just the edges of the sheets of plywood and then cover with the vacuum bag. Here's that panel in the bag with the vacuum airway running down the middle of the mold and overall clamping pressure being applied by atmospheric pressure only. Plenty of clamping pressure for the huge surface. Very small equipment investments. 5 men can easily laminate this half-hull panel for a 64-footer in 2 days. This is looking into the stern of that 64-footer, getting ready to install the inboard diesel engine. Notice the cross beam across the top. And notice that these panels can be an inch thick for maximum puncture resistance, but because there's no framing, the vessel is still very lightweight. And compared to today's foam glass construction, it's relatively inexpensive. Here she is operating in the commercial excursion business, where she has been working in Hawaii now for over 20 years. And the Coast Guard loves her. These constant camber boats have proven to be extremely durable in hard commercial service. They're certified for carrying passengers for hire offshore by the U.S. Coast Guard. She even has underwater windows so the tourists can see the bottom and the underwater critters, which is enough to raise your environmental consciousness. She's just one of many of these so-called catamarans that are now operating through all of the tropical resort areas of the world. And they have introduced literally millions of people to the joys of multi-hull sailing. This one can actually embark its passengers directly from the beach, even in an open ocean surf. It can be lively at times, but the folks can actually come and go directly from the hotel where they are staying at Lahaina, Maui. And these bow nets are a very popular place to ride, of course. People can really spread out in the sun. Down below they're palatial, with a number of these booths where individual groups can gather. There's the bar. And the exit onto the foredeck, where we can see she has a very smooth ride. But let's not forget those millions of fisher folk all around the world who could really benefit from the transfer of appropriate technology such as constant camber. Personally, I think they're the ones who may be pointing the way ahead for humankind. We have yet another example of this concept coming up in Chapter 17 in the remote Pacific island nation of Tuvalu. Please come along.